I don't think I got the last part, but let me comment on a number of things you raised. You said that the national security in Cuba is the center of the Cuban policy. Then you went on to say the relations in terms of cooperation and coordination not as good as it could be between us as the neighbors and so on. And I agree with that. In the sense of having a formal structure for cooperation and coordination, it doesn't now exist. When we have negotiated regional agreements, in fact, we started out by trying to have one that went from the Arctic to the Antarctic, which was a silly approach of a maritime cooperation agreement, because if you could, including Cuba, in Curacao, because if you could ever get the 30-plus countries to agree, that agreement would be so watered down and full of reservations, it would be useless as an operational tool. And I have always argued that what we really need to get together is our sub-regional agreements, because Jamaica has little interest in an agreement with Guyana as a first step. We are interested in Colombia, Haiti, Cuba, the Bahamas. And I've always argued, if we start with that sub-region, then once we have that working for a little while, we start to build a kind of confidences amongst ourselves that we now broaden that to join all the sub-regions into a broader regional agreement as it becomes necessary. But we decided to go from the top down, have a regional, well, hemispheric, then it went down to a regional when they see it wouldn't work. But part of the problem, as always, we have not invested enough for us to sit down and talk together. These have always been programs put together, sponsored and funded by the United States, European Union, and others. And so, whilst I was arguing and so on for the sub-regional, I mean, I wasn't paying the piper. And so you have something lingering for several years and you get an agreement that is hardly any use. What was it that stopped us as a sub-region just getting together and doing our own thing? It's part of the problem. But again, I suppose, if you talk about Jamaica and Cuba, though we have agreements, I don't think we have been firmly driven as yet, which is a problem with us, by the operational imperatives as yet. We tend to be more in a catch-up mode. When things have become very active now, we say, oh, we need to have a liaison officer. We need to exchange officers. We need to do so and so. Rather than be proactive, set it up so that we can see these things early. You mentioned something about the confrontation, Venezuela, USA, and Neighbours. Venezuela arming itself. Personally, I don't think there's going to be any invasion or any wars at all, US or Venezuela. Or in this region, for that matter. But let me deal with those specifics. No, I won't say that. But let me what I've always found strange is Venezuela arming herself in the manner that has caused concerns. I've hardly heard those concerns coming from her neighbors. We have many people in the world who are not on all fours. And I can give you an example. During the time of when there were refugees, Cuban refugees being held in Guantanamo Bay, Brothers to the Rescue were allowed to fly their private aircraft into Guantanamo Bay. They wanted to see how they were being treated. And immediately they took off from Guantanamo Bay. They overflew Santiago and dropped leaflets. That's provocation. So do not discount some crazy doing something to provoke a response. In fact, there are some who strongly believe that the shooting down of the Brothers to the Rescue on the north side, the truth is, it was intense provocation. And you're only going to accept so much and no more. And that derailed what seemed to have been certain overtures on the part of the United States, President Clinton at the time, with Cuba. Derailed it totally. So we have to look at the Cuba-Bahamas, Cuba-Haiti relationship. I would only say that Cuba, in my view, will engage seriously with anyone who engages Cuba. But I think from the Cuban perspective, they might be looking more, and some of these countries are looking more at the health issues, the other cooperation and so on, not so much the security. But I would believe that if anyone wants to engage them on the security front, then they would reciprocate in kind. But I think for some reason, that has not happened. Bilingual capability. I can't say the extent we have it, but whatever it is, insufficient. But that's something that would have to be ramped up and ramped up very quickly. Let me say something about tourism. When I went to Santiago, I've always held the view that Cuba opening up tourism and so on, I didn't know what Mr. Tourism Minister said last night. This is a personal view. I did not see this as being detrimental to Jamaica's tourism industry. Having been to Cuba several times, it's a young product. When you talk about entertainment and certain things and so on, I went there, I saw some Canadian tourists, and they're totally unhappy. But where we have an advantage, when I went to the lobby of that hotel, I see advertised on the board, day trip to Montego Bay. And in Montego Bay, I understand, you can get a day trip into Cuba. And it seems to me, as the Caribbean Tourism Association just recently said, they are now marketing something Caribbean. It's no longer the individual country. It seems to me, we in particular in Jamaica can twin. Buy Cuba, get Jamaica. Buy Jamaica, get Cuba. I think our biggest challenge is not Cuba opening up. It's us fixing our product and dealing with the crime. I think that's it, yeah.
Maybe you might want to say something, if you know it, about how Cubans think of Jamaicans and about Jamaican people being incarcerated in Cuba. If you know anything related to that, that was Jessica's question.
Over the years, our contact with Cuba has been mostly, especially in the 80s, through the British High Commission. And sometimes we have found some Jamaicans through the British. They went to visit some of their own nationals, and they ran into some Jamaicans. Word comes to us. But now there's more direct contact. The cooperation is excellent. We just had one of our most wanted picked up in Cuban waters. And we had a case of some gun running where they washed up in Cuba. And the chain of custody of that evidence was so good. We sent a Coast Guard boat up with our own team and all the required people to take them over from the Cuban, and it was enough to convict those persons in a Jamaican court for gun running out of Haiti into Jamaica.
All the way in the back? Oh, you have the mic, so you control who asks.
Cliff Lumsden from the Bank of Jamaica. I heard that the Venezuelans, I think, out from their president, mentioning some overtures that he may want to consider establishing a relationship with the Russians to protect their interest in the region. Not sure how you would see that, Commissioner, affecting the Cubans, and how would they factor into any such agreement, and in fact how CARICOM may react if any such agreement would have been established. Secondly, you mentioned about wanted men being caught over in Cuban waters and so on. That was my second question. How do you see, if any migration to Cuba by any wanted persons here, should they open up, for want of a better word?